Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. One of the things that could lead to higher yields is getting fertility closer to that root zone. When you look at things like Popup fertilizer, they're getting used widely across the industry. We'll talk about what could make it work even better on your farm.
We get a lot of questions each year about satellite imagery and how a farmer could possibly use that to improve his yield. So we'll talk about that today.
We've got a tough to control weed of the week as always, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
Grain handling safety. This is incredibly important for any farmer that's out there. That's our Farm Basics topic today.
Well, one good thing about grain this year is there's lots of it. In many areas of the country, farmers had a great harvest, and so bins are full. Outside storage facilities are full. Grain handling bags are full, and some farmers just have grain just piled up out on the ground. And what do you do when you have this much grain? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do. You look for market opportunities to sell that grain at a high price. And so farmers right in the middle of the winter, where normally they aren't moving a lot of grain on some farms, are moving more grain than ever. So we want you to know what the safety things are to keep in mind as you're moving grain during the winter.
All right, it's not just during the winter either. When there's a lot of grain, a lot of this grain ends up getting held much longer than normal. Even on our own farm, we're selling a bunch of grain in August. We have it pre-sold, so we have to hold on to this grain for almost a year. Well, what can happen sometimes if the grain is not properly cared for in the bin is there can be a little bit of spoilage. And the number one thing that we worry about is if someone enters a bin, especially if they do it by themselves, and they somehow get trapped in grain. Quite often we have issues with, oh, the grain's not coming out. We turned the auger on and it's not coming out. Well, I'm going to take a rod in there and I'm going to try to poke at that grain, at that spoiled grain. So all these things that we talk about, oh yeah, let's just go fix that problem, fix this problem. Have a buddy, have somebody that's with you all the time that knows where you're at, and just be safe about these things. We would encourage you to, if you're in the grain bin, use some type of safety harness and have it strapped onto the side, onto something solid. So if you do happen to go down a little bit, you can maybe pull yourself back out, or at least you're not going to get sucked down into an auger or below the grain.
One other thing that's more of a challenge this year than other years is that many farmers filled their grain bins too full. Now, I don't mean they filled a grain bin so much that it's overflowing out the top of the bin, but what I do mean is grain bins have a peak to them, and farmers a lot of times want to fill so the top is nice and level. But instead this year, because we ran out of room and ran out of places to go with the grain, some farmers filled the bins all the way up to the peak. Now, as moisture tries to get out of grain, like in corn for example, you'll see moisture go up through that peak trying to get out. So in some of those bins in the winter, we see those peaks that were kind of wet, now they've crusted over or they've got ice on them, and farmers are trying to pull grain out of the bin so they can at least get it back down and flat to avoid spoilage issues. What we're very concerned about is when you see some crusting at the top, that we don't have a farmer step into that bin and walk out on some crust only to break through and fall down into the bin.
One last thing I guess I would mention is use care around all augers. And this is something too that our dad told us growing up is, hey, you got to just take your time, walk all the way around the tractor. Don't be stepping over augers, stepping over PTO shafts. You got to be super careful on the farm because there are so many people that do get injured, do get even killed each year on the farm. It's one of the most dangerous professions, and a lot of the issues could just be solved if, number one, you take your time, and number two, you have someone with you, someone around you as much as possible. If nothing else, at least have your cell phone right there on you all the time, so if something does go terribly awry, you can call someone immediately.
Well, grain bin safety is very, very important, and handling grain can be a dangerous job. So just take your time, be careful, and do things the right way. One other thing that you'll definitely want to do the right way on your farm is controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop it coming up later in the show.
Sometimes getting the yield you want means you need a whole new game plan. Think about it. When the older, conventional fertilizer you've been using goes head-to-head with tough soil conditions, they can get all tied up before they ever have a chance to score. That's when it's time to regroup. Time to send in the A-Team. Agro-Liquid isn't like other fertilizers. Their nutrient-balanced products stay in the soil in the right formulations, in just the right amounts. And because of Agro-Liquid's unique chelation technology, you wind up using less and seeing more in your yields. So you could wind up having one heck of a championship season. Make a smart start with Agro-Liquid. To find the closest nutrient coach near you, visit agroliquid.com.
Introducing the SoilMax ZD48, the newest addition to the SoilMax Gold Digger lineup. The first plow designed for smaller class tractors, the ZD48 has been tested on tractors weighing between 10,000 and 16,000 pounds with excellent results. Designed for row crop farms, vineyards, irrigation, and specialty crop farms. The SoilMax ZD48 will install tile up to 48 inches deep, as well as install 3 or 4-inch tile. The ZD48 truly opens up the world of tile installation to more farms than ever before.
There are trillions of hardworking microbes right beneath your feet. Today, Monsanto BioAg is harnessing the power of microbes, creating microscopic farmhands that help plants access nutrients, enhance root and shoot growth, and handle stressful conditions throughout the season, protecting and maximizing your yield potential. We're turning 500 trillion microbes into 500 trillion new farmhands, ready for work. Nature, it's powerful technology.
For lower costs, higher production, Mandico Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Avoid costly downtime with Twister's ease of maintenance. Its unique Coulter suspension allows it to follow the contour of the field yet remain forgiving in rocks. Our hydraulically adjustable Coulter angles mean you never leave the cab, making residue management easier, more efficient. Spring or fall, the Mandico Twister is the new leader. Check with your local dealer or visit mandicoagri.com.
There are a lot of different ways to apply fertilizer. We talk quite often about broadcasting and banding. Well, one of the ways you can band is what we would call pop-up, right in the furrow, applying fertilizer. Now you have to be careful about which products you use and which crops we're talking about, and certainly the rate. So that's why we wanted to talk about this subject just a little bit today before we get into planting season this spring.
Well, there's certainly some equipment options that you have for planters to be able to apply fertilizer right in the furrow. You may dribble it right on top of the seed. You may use a splitter to shoot it out to the sides of the trench. You may use a Keaton. There's just a number of different equipment options. And when you talk to one farmer, he may love one system and the next farmer has different soils and finds a different system that works better for him. If you've got a lot of clay in your soil, you really have to watch out for sticky soil. If you've got lighter sandy soils, you may have some more options. You may have some more flexibility on how you do it.
All right, Darren mentioned these different soil types. Kind of the way I look at it is, if I've got a lighter soil with low organic matter, I got to be really careful, because all these fertilizer things, when I'm talking in furrow, they are much more of a concern in a drier overall environment. When there's moisture and heavy soil, there's certainly not as much risk. The other thing that lowers the risk is the amount of soil in between the seed and that fertilizer. So if you're putting anything directly on the seed, well, we don't love that. That's a lot more dangerous. If you can be off to the side or somehow get a little bit of soil in between the fertilizer and the seed, that's a much better thing in terms of safety. But either way, we really encourage you, try to pick safer products rather than the more dangerous ones that have a little bit more salt.
It's been a real focus for us on our farm, is finding these safe products. We've really liked, for a phosphorus source, a product called ProGerminator. It's one we've used for a number of years on our farm. Even when we mess up and we get a higher rate than we were intending to put in the seed, we've seen good levels of safety in corn. We've also used a little bit of it in soybeans. Brian gets really nervous with anything in the furrow in soybeans, so he's not as comfortable with this as I am, but if you move over into 2x2, soybeans could be a good option for liquid fertilizer as well. Then when it comes to potassium sources, we've really liked Sure-K. We've also liked Calibrate. Both have been good sources of K that we can use safely in the furrow.
Yeah, the main thing is find something that's very low salt. Okay, salt is your enemy when we start talking in furrow. The other thing that you can do is dilute the product down. I don't care which product you're using. If you blend it with some water, that definitely helps safeten it. And it seems like you just get a little bit more uptake, a little bit more response yield-wise.
The other thing is micronutrients. We're seeing a lot of guys that want to get micronutrients on right at planting time to make sure that they've got some out there for their crop all through the season. That's absolutely fine. Oftentimes you'll see rates of 1 to 2 quarts being put right in the furrow. Some of the highest yielding guys across the country will put a gallon or more. I know on our farm it's very common for us to use a gallon of micronutrients in a blend right in the furrow. We've seen some good luck with that over the years. We've gotten a little more consistent results than we have out of just doing a foliar with a blended product. But if you're going to use micronutrients in a foliar program, you could definitely use that a little bit here and a little bit there to spread it out throughout the season.
All right, but Darren said a gallon of micronutrients. That really concerns me. Any of these things that are going to have salt, you have to be super careful with. Try some stuff on your farm, but all I can tell you is this. A lot of guys that we talk to will say, hey, 3 pounds of salt per acre, 5 at the most. That's all we want to see, okay? So if we're talking 5 pounds of salt, for example, in a 30-inch row, that's about 3 gallons of 1034O. Well, some people say, well, I'm using 5 gallons, I'm using 8 gallons, I'm using 10 gallons of 1034O, and I've never had a problem yet. Well, that may be, but that year is coming, and we've seen it before where guys have used it for many years, no problem, and all of a sudden, one year, 50 bushel yield loss. The corn comes out of the ground, it's all twisted up. That's a bad day when you walk out into your field and you see, uh-oh, what I used, what I spent money on actually hurt my yield tremendously. So be super careful with pop-up fertilizer.
And anytime we talk about putting fertilizer on in the furrow, we get the questions, well, what else can I do at the same time? Fungicide has been one of the things that there's been a lot of interest in. Can I put a fungicide like xanthion, for example, right in the furrow? We do that commonly on our farm, especially when we're planting early in cooler soils. It can be done. However, you'll need separate tanks and you'll need to not mix those things together because in general, fertilizer and fungicide don't mix very well together. However, there are some insecticide products that do mix fairly well, like Capture LFR, for example, and Ethos XB. Those are good options that you could potentially mix with fertilizer products.
I guess the other thing I wanted to add is we've been talking about this pop-up fertilizer, and yes, you can throw some insecticide with it. Fungicide, can't mix it, but it also could go in the furrow. But if you want to do a lot of fertilizer, you've got to look at something else. So if you start telling me, well, I need 200 pounds of actual K, or I need 150 pounds of actual P, you can't do that in furrow. You've got to do a broadcast or some other type of band out there to get that much fertility on. When we start talking in furrow, yes, there's some products you can maybe get by with 5, 10, 15 gallons in furrow, but preferably we like to see the lower end rates a lot of times and used on a very regular basis. So even in our high fertility soils, we're still using some pop-up fertilizer, 2 gallons to 4 gallons, something like that in corn, maybe a half gallon to a gallon in soybeans. If you want to use higher rates, use 2x2 method. If you need to use really high rates, that's where we suggest you broadcast just for the simple safety factor out there. We just don't want to get too much anywhere near the seed.
Well, putting fertilizer right in the furrow is certainly an option that can be done in a number of different crops. Just watch the amount of fertilizer that you're putting in that furrow so you don't get too much salt in close proximity to the seed.
Well, the problem with putting fertilizer on any ground is you're going to fertilize the crop, but you're also going to fertilize weeds. We'll talk about how to control our weed of the week coming up later in the show.
With new seed traits and chemistries entering the market, your crop protection equipment needs precision and adaptability. Hi-Pro Innovative Spray Technologies has the products to give your applications greater accuracy, less drift, and more coverage. Hi-Pro, right on technology, right on target.
Aerial fungicide and insecticide application means high speed, low volume, and high cost to reach the top of the plant canopy. But 360 Undercover is a low speed, high volume application system that provides precision placement under the crop canopy. You hit the target and get coverage on both the top and underside of leaves. Plus, 360 Undercover mounts to the boom of your self-propelled sprayer so you or your ag retailer can get more value from this important machine. Boost efficacy with 360 Undercover. Learn more at 360yieldcenter.com.
We started doing Liberty beans roughly 7 years ago. Every year we've kind of expanded up to about 50% Liberty. The thing I liked about them was the good weed control. The yield has always been right up there with one of my better yielding ones. Our biggest weed pressure is kochia. Pre-emerge is very important, and then usually early part we will spray them with Liberty, and we get a good catch on the weeds, and we've only had to spray post-emerge once. Getting the weeds when they're young and early is half the battle. Moisture is our limiting factor, and especially this year, and each acre is going to produce so much plant matter. I'd rather have it produce a bean than a weed.
The Liberty Link system, a simply better solution, now backed by the Liberty Weed Control Guarantee, because Liberty is simply better weed control by Bayer.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Compaction created during planting leaves thousands of dollars of potential yield in your fields. Copperhead Ag has developed the Furrow Cruiser spiked closing wheel to close the seed trench more effectively. With a unique combination of closing power and control, the Furrow Cruiser provides earlier, more even emergence and higher stand counts, returning yield potential and putting profit back in your pocket. For more information on why you should never run a traditional closing system again, visit copperheadag.com.
One of the questions we get quite commonly is, does satellite imagery pay? Should I be using satellite imagery? How can this work in my farm operation? So we wanted to talk about that a little bit today.
Well, there are a number of services out there like Climate and Farmer's Edge that are using satellite imagery right now to help farmers make maps of their field and identify problem areas. And to me, this is the big thing right off the bat that's clear and obvious. You can identify problem areas in your field with satellite imagery and then target your field scouting and say, hey, that's the area of the field I need to get out to. Maybe the middle of the season, there may be 6 foot tall corn out there, and you can figure out, hey, I can't see that area from the road, but wow, I got to get back to it and find out what's going on.
Here's what I will usually say to farmers is think about getting your yield map 3 months in advance. It's real easy when you're going through during harvest and you take a look at that fancy yield map you have and you say, oh, that area's bad, and ooh, this other area's bad. Boy, if those areas had just been up with the field average, I'd have a lot overall higher average. Okay, well, that's great to say at harvest time, but there's nothing you can do about it then. And you know what, even in season, there might not be anything you can do about the particular problem you have, but at least you know what the problem is, so in a future year, you can solve that problem. So that's the way I look at this whole thing. I'm just finding out where those problem areas are sooner, and like Darren said, it allows you the chance, the opportunity to go out into the field, do some scouting, look at the plants, look at the roots while they're still growing.
Satellite imagery is being used to set up management zones out on your farm. Now, in the past, we've looked at things like soils maps and said, okay, let's go out for the different soil types and do some different sampling out there. Maybe we'll spread fertilizer differently in these different soil types that are out there. Well, companies like Farmer's Edge are using satellite maps to set up management zones on your farm and then go out and target your soil sampling program based on that satellite map, rather than, well, here's this old soils map data, not taking into account all the management you've done for years.
Yeah, and I think that's incredibly important because who really cares what the soil type is? All we care about is the profitability of each acre. So I think this is the right way to set up management zones, and I think it's the right way to set up a field scouting program.
Well, the question really gets back to, are these services worth it? Is it something I should be doing on my farm? Yes, there's some value there. Whether you look at something like Farmer's Edge or Climate or whatever system that you want to look at, there are definitely tools there that could help you manage your farm a little bit better and try and target some of these areas a little bit sooner.
Yeah, and there's certainly value. It's just maybe you want to try it on a field or two to begin with and take it from there and see what you can do, how you can make this work in your operation.
One other thing you want to manage well is weed control on your farm. We'll show you how to stop our weed of the week coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Farming isn't just in the land,
It's in you. Take control of weeds like never before. Enlist builds on the Roundup Ready system, combining proven control of a new 2,4-D and glyphosate in Enlist Duo herbicide. Protect what matters without changing the way you farm. Talk to your seed or crop protection supplier today.
You may have identified our weed of the week as pigeon grass, but let's get a little more specific. It's giant foxtail.
All right, you do need to identify the different foxtail species for certain herbicides that you may use out on your farm and for management in general. Because what we'll see with foxtails is a lot of times the green foxtail may be the first one to pop up in the year. And you'll see some of the other types of foxtail pop up just a little bit later, in my experience anyway. That's one reason. The other thing you may consider is if your herbicide that you're going to use is a little better on a green foxtail versus a yellow foxtail or a giant foxtail. Sometimes there's some different rates on products like Puma, for example, in wheat had a different rate depending on which foxtail species you were fighting.
Well, basically the green foxtail was the easiest, the yellow foxtail was the most difficult to control. Giant foxtail we usually would say is somewhere in the middle. But the whole thing with giant foxtail, when you're trying to identify it, it's got a hairy ligule like the other pigeon grass species, the green foxtail, the yellow foxtail. The difference is, I would call giant foxtail hairy foxtail. There's hair all over this thing, leaf, stem, you name it. So if you see that, you're looking at giant foxtail.
The good thing is, giant foxtail, like the other species here, we're talking about green and yellow, it's an annual weed. So if you can stop it from going to seed, well, you're a long ways towards wiping it out on your farm.
All right, so let's get real specific in terms of control. For corn, this is where we have the most difficulty with foxtail, and foxtail really robs yield. You've got to have your cornfield clean and free of foxtails like giant foxtail at least until the time the corn's a foot tall. So we strongly encourage you, get a pre down, even if it's a reduced rate, but the best things are Surpass, Harness, Outlook, and Dual, or even Zidua, or anything that contains those products. Then you can follow post-emerge in conventional corn with accent. Just make sure the grass is really small. Otherwise, Roundup and Liberty are very effective too.
In soybeans, here's where the yellows come into play. Treflan, Sonlan, or Prowl are highly effective on the foxtail species. Post-emerge, you've got Roundup and Liberty in crops where those are appropriate. Also, you've got the volunteer corn killers, which many farmers will call them. Things like Select Max, for example, do a nice job on cleaning up foxtail escapes as well.
All right, turning to wheat, use Prepare Down, follow with Axial over the top, but Everest 2.0 is pretty effective too.
Don't let our weed of the week giant foxtail take over on your farm. Start with a good pre-emerge herbicide program and you can wipe out almost 99% of giant foxtail, then clean up any escapes before it goes to seed.
Well, that's it for our weed of the week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
When you join Farmer's Edge, we equip your farm with the latest technology. We install CAN plugs, the device that collects the data that powers many Farm Command features. It's automatic, transmits wirelessly, and functions in real time. It also works with any brand of equipment. Once installed, we give your equipment the field-ready check. It's another way we help you grow more precisely.
When you think about it, productivity starts at planting. So it's time to rethink how productive your planter can be. We did with the new Case IH 2000 Series Early Riser Planter. We rethought your row unit so it's tougher, more accurate. We rethought your meter, took the most precise technology, factory installed it. We rethought every inch of the Case IH Early Riser Planter to make it the most productive planter around. And if you think about it, that's exactly what you want.
The ease of use on the Spartan is pretty simple. I can hook this up in 5 minutes. Anybody that runs a chopper that chops any sort of sorghum, cane silage, anything like that, anything that is tough that ever goes down, Spartan is the best thing that we have found, and we've been looking for something like this for over 15 years, and it blew me away.
guess I've always been one to think that you can't just do what everybody else is doing if you want to try to grow the best corn. Stein has proven to me that the corn yields. I figured out that my other companies couldn't keep up with them. You've got to take a chance to try something and see if it works for you. And this has worked for me. I choose Stein because Stein has yield.
The window of opportunity in farming is short. When it's time to be in the field, you have to know your equipment is ready to work. With a Case IH uptime inspection from Titan Machinery, you can be confident that you're ready for the season. Our certified Case IH factory-trained technicians perform rigorous multi-point inspections on your equipment to catch problems before they cost you valuable time. Don't take a chance. Contact the service professional at your local Titan Machinery dealership today and schedule an uptime inspection. That's Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
As weed resistance becomes more of a problem across the country, your crop protection program needs to stay flexible to be effective. Hi-Pro Innovative Spray Technology's wide selection of spray tips and nozzle configurations are available to keep your crop protection program right on technology, right on target.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
The AFS Connect Farm Management System from Case IH connects you, and only you, to the information you need most from your equipment, from anywhere, at any time. AFS Connect, only from Case IH.
With commodity prices at low levels, you've got to look at the value of each expense closely if you're going to be profitable in 2017. I'll share one expense you simply can't afford during today's Iron Talk. If you haven't been doing your own spraying the last few years or ever, you need to consider how much you're paying a custom applicator per hour to do the job. Most self-propelled sprayers can easily spray 80 acres or more in an hour, with average application charges in the $7 per acre range. Let's say the average field gets 2 applications of crop protection products, but there's always a chance you may need more. If you farm 500 acres, 2 applications across your farm would cost $7 per acre each time for a total of 14 times 500 or $7,000. Now, if that number alone doesn't alarm you, consider this. $7 per acre times 80 acres equals a charge of $560 per hour. Now, I know that paying $60 to $90 per hour of time for a qualified mechanic gets some farmers up in arms, but $560 per hour? In 2017, that's a price you simply can't choose to afford any longer. Add to that the fact that most equipment dealers across the country have more inventory of sprayers and other equipment than they'd like to be carrying, and you've got a reason to believe you could get a great deal on a self-propelled or a pull-type sprayer between now and spring. Running your own sprayer has many advantages for your farm and your bottom line. Even if you need to hire an additional person to run the machine, you can surely do it for less than $560 per hour. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
On your farm, you need speed and year-round effectiveness in your tillage program. The Quick Till from Norwood Sales allows you to move quickly through your fields, maximizing time and improving yield. Constructed of heavy-duty materials, the Quick Till is ideal for both spring and fall applications, from preparing a healthy seedbed early in the season to breaking up corn residue after harvest. For more information about how a Quick Till can improve fields on your farm, call Norwood Sales today.
That's our time for today, and we hope you can join us again next week. But in the meantime, we encourage you to tune in to the Ag PhD radio show for more agronomic information, and we take your live phone calls each weekday on Sirius XM Channel 147 at 2 p.m. Central.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Soil is nature's filter to keep contaminants out of our water. As rain falls on soils and seeps down through, the minerals and microbial life in the soil remove and detoxify nutrients, as well as inorganic materials. To learn how farmers manage soil and groundwater, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.